Good morning, everyone. I'm really looking forward to going through the webinar with you today. My name's Rosie Evans. I'm Principal Behavioural Scientist at Coach Hub, and this topic of well-being for coaching is one that's particularly close to my heart. So my background is as a psychologist. I'm also a coach, but I really specialize initially in mental health, and I became interested in coaching, but also practices like mindfulness as preventative tools to best support a more general population mental health and well-being. So I'm really happy to introduce you today to Coach Hub Wellbeing and how digital coaching can best support your workforce well-being. But before we get started into the content itself, I wanted to share some studies with you. Perhaps you've seen this. I know it's gone around on LinkedIn quite a lot. And it's about Zoom fatigue. And so the reason for sharing this is, of course, we are having a wellbeing webinar today. So we want to see about how we can best set this up for you to best support your wellbeing today. And so this was actually done by Microsoft's Human Factors Lab. And they used a methodology called EEG. And these are EEG caps, which you can see in the bottom over here, which are used to measure something called beta wave activity. So this is associated with stress and stress in the brain. So they invited about 14 meeting participants. They gave half breaks in between their Zoom meetings and the other half no breaks. And for those given breaks, their average beta wave activity remained actively or largely steady over time. And the coolness of their stress levels is really visualized here in the blues and the greens. And for those deprived of breaks, their average beta wave actively rose as time passed, which really suggests a buildup of stress after each back-to-back meeting. And you can see this from the shift from cool to hot. There's greens, blues, two reds. So overall, this chart represents the relative difference in the beta activity between break, no break conditions at the top of each meeting. And so what are the key takeaways that we can learn from this particular study? So there's three main takeaways. The first is actually to take breaks in between meetings so that the brain, it can reset, it can recharge. The second is to actually reduce the number of back-to-back meetings, because this can actually decrease your ability to focus and engage. The third is to be aware of the fact that these transitions, they can in themselves be a source of high stress. So why am I sharing all this with you? As I said, we want to set up today's webinar to support your well-being. So I'm happy to share that we're going to actually finish a little bit early. So we have the full hour set aside today for the webinar, but we'll make sure that you have a well-being break in between this webinar and your next appointment. And so my question to you, especially as a coaching company, is what are you going to do with your well-being break? How are you best going to plan or set a goal for this 10 minutes that you have after the webinar today? And we have a few sources of inspiration for you. This is based on what's called the 5 ways to well-being. And today you'll see us focusing primarily on mental health, and I'll explain why in a moment. But well-being as an overall topic is encompassant of mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual health. And so these 5 ways to well-being really encompasses all of those different aspects, and hopefully gives you an source of inspiration of what to do in your break, maybe at other points in your day. So maybe take a moment to connect with others, to be physically active, go for a walk, do a stretch, maybe learn something new, although you have just done that today with the webinar, you can tick that box. Maybe give to others, do something for another person. And then finally, perhaps take some time to pay attention to the present moment. Right, so we'll finish a bit early so you can go off and enjoy your well-being break. But what are we going to be focusing on today in the webinar? So today we're going to be focusing on these 5 main areas. The first is the elephant in the room, perhaps I've given us away a little bit what that might be. Then we'll go into an introduction into what Coach Hub Wellbeing is. Then we'll have a discussion about the barriers to wellbeing in the workplace. We'll discuss the business case for wellbeing, of course, and then some next steps that you can take away with Coach Hub. So the elephant in the room, what might that be? And I think taking this moment to really reflect back on the last year when we've all gone through this really significant pandemic experience. And so mental health really becomes even more present in the way that we're working or in our daily lives. This is a combination of fear, worry, and stress being normal responses to the perceived and real threats that we've experienced over the last year. And this is especially true in times of uncertainty and fear and unknown circumstances. So it's been really normal to experience all of these often challenging experiences. And it's particularly understandable in the context of COVID and the pandemic. So not only do we have the fear of perhaps, contracting that virus, but there's been a significant shift to our daily lives. Our movements have been restricted. We haven't been able to see family or friends. We've had this shift to working from home. Many of us have faced temporary unemployment. We've been homeschooling. And just again, this lack of social connection, or physical connection, I should say, has really taken a toll on our well-being and mental health in particular. And so today we want to really focus on this aspect of well-being, because there are some discussions around how mental health is the next pandemic. And organizations, systems have a really big role to play in preventing that. And so this Coach Hub Wellbeing solution I'll introduce you to today is a proactive and preventative approach to mental health. And we'll also go into a bit of discussion about what, who and where and when to offer coaching to, and when to offer maybe psychotherapy to, because there are some clear differences. And coaching is not a replacement for therapeutic support, but we'll go into detail in just a moment. So why is it important to think of solutions that you can offer to your workforce? One of the biggest barriers to well-being, or to having this open discussion and addressing the elephant in the room, is that around 1 in 2 employees, they don't feel that they can be honest about their true well-being with their manager or with their colleagues in some cases. So this idea of disclosure and confidentiality is a really key aspect, especially when there continues to be a stigma attached to some of these very normal mental health experiences. And this is something that we want to change and tackle with coaching, because coaching in itself is a highly confidential intervention. There's a strict code of ethics. In front of you here, you can see some of the examples, the code of ethics from the International Coaching Federation. So a responsibility to clients, to practice and performance, to professionalism, and to society. And this code of ethics, not only do our coaches at Coach Hub take into their coaching conversations, but of course, Coach Hub as an organization, we do as well. So making sure that our platform is enabling and maintaining these code of ethics. But of course, as a digital coaching provider, we're also required to actually support with GDPR compliance, which helps to maintain that confidentiality. So it really is a safe space to be unsafe, and helps increase the likelihood that an employee can share some challenges that they're experiencing. But what is mental health, and how can coaching help? So mental health is a state of mental and psychological well-being in which everyone realizes their own potential. They're able to cope with the normal stresses of life. They can work productively and fruitfully, and they're able to make a contribution to their community. So reflecting on this definition that's offered by the World Health Organization, I think it's really clear to see how, or begin to understand how, positive mental health or perhaps poor mental health impacts the workplace. So first of all, that realization of potential. Many people in HR teams and L&D teams, of course, that's a big focus, helping your people to be the best they can be. And then, of course, being able to cope with the normal stresses. We haven't had normal stresses over the last year, and so this has taken a toll. And so it's really important to think of how to move or support our workforce to better manage and cope with those daily stresses. And there are many that come from the workplace. And of course, we want to support always with the productivity and contribution to the communities that we're a part of. And so coaching, again, I'll explain in a moment, is one fantastic way to particularly help with that. But reflecting on this definition of mental health, let's have a look at the definition of coaching. Coaching is a partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that maximizes personal and professional potential. So immediately we can see how positive mental health and coaching really come together, and the ultimate goal of coaching, helping people to realize their potential, really is a good facilitator for supporting and enabling positive mental health. I mentioned that coaching is not therapy, it's not a replacement of, but of course there are some similarities. So what are they? The first is that both interventions, approaches, they typically are done in a one-on-one format. So it's between the coach and the coachee, the therapist and the client, for example. They're highly confidential, but they're also highly personalized. So coaching is a highly personalized people development solution that's completely tailored to an individual's context. And so, again, thinking about the last year, this is really important, an important aspect for helping people with mental health in the workplace, because everyone's experience will have been different. And so there is no one-size-fits-all solution here. So personalization is very, very important. But both methodologies, they use similar techniques. They're both doing a lot of listening, powerful questioning, they offer some interventions, and that's where the crossover is. But what are the differences? So coaching is much more future-orientated and goal-orientated. So there's a very clear direction of moving the coachee in a desired direction. And so there's not much reflection on the past or processing of the past, and is really looking at how to activate internal and external resources. Therapy, on the other hand, is by and large more focused on the past experiences. It's really looking at how to heal trauma, treat mental health disorders. So mental health disorders are different from obviously the extreme of mental health. And there's a bit of a focus on analysis and processing. So there are some clear differences, and to really help secure where and when to offer coaching or therapy, I wanted to share this overview with you. So it's an overview of let's say mental health and well-being in a general population. And so coaching is best offered from a moderate level of well-being to high, whereas counseling therapy is more lower end of the moderate to low level of well-being, or demonstrating very high psychopathology, so clinical symptoms of mental illness. To really reinforce this idea, I wanted to share another overview with you, a graph with you, which I think paints the picture very well. So this engagement and well-being matrix was developed by Anthony Grant in 2016, and it's really to actually, first of all, show the evolution of coaching in recent years, because coaching, it has moved from a more performance-focused intervention into, and even previously, focusing on performance still had a byproduct of boosting well-being. But now it's becoming clear that coaching needs to focus on both well-being and performance, and especially in the workplace. So why is that? So there's 4 quadrants here. So if there's demonstration of both high levels of well-being and high performance, you have flourishing individuals, teams, organizations, able to maintain a very sustainable level of high performance. If you have high performance but low well-being, you're seeing people maybe more distressed but functional. And I think this is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing more and more over in the last months. Perhaps you've seen an article written by another Grant, Adam Grant, on languishing, this meh feeling that we're all experiencing at the moment. And so languishing is an example or a terminology to describe lower levels of mental health in a general population. And that's what we would put under the distressed and functional category. Now, if you have high levels of well-being, but perhaps low performance, you have the happy non-worker, someone who's very acquiescent. And so this is, of course, maybe the individual level, the well-being is high, but of course, you need to think of how to support with motivation and drive for performance there. And then last but not least, there is the low levels of performance and well-being, which is summarized as the distressed and dysfunctional quadrant. So coaching as a tool is best offered to the acquiescent, flourishing, and distressed and functional employees that you have. As a general rule of thumb, if someone is both distressed and dysfunctional, it's going to be very challenging for them to engage in the coaching process, because coaching, as I mentioned, is very focused on goal, is very goal orientated. And the goal striving process requires the individual to have the capacity to actually set goals and work towards them for themselves. And if you are distressed and dysfunctional and really experiencing this lower levels of mental health, or perhaps experiencing mental illness, it's very, very challenging to perhaps have that motivation required to change, to develop. And so there's a clear requirement for some other interventions. So I hope that was helpful, just to have an overview of who and where and when to offer coaching to, what the difference between coaching and therapy is. And now I'd love to introduce you to Coach Hub Wellbeing. I'll take a quick sip. Because Coach Hub Wellbeing is Coach Hub's wellbeing specific offering. And so our definition of how our coaches really focus on wellbeing topics is defined here. So it's a professional, collaborative relationship between the coach and coachee. It's aimed at identifying, utilizing, and optimizing and developing psychological strengths and resources in order to enhance positive states, traits, and behaviors. So thinking back to this graph, it's thinking of how maybe we can use coaching to help someone or a cohort who's distressed but functional, move more into a flourishing state. And in general, that's the aim, is to move acquiescent workers or distressed and functional workers into a flourishing state. And then the prevention aspect is to help those in a flourishing state maintain and stay there. So really happy to introduce Coach Hub Wellbeing to you. What are some examples of wellbeing topics? So a really tried and tested model of wellbeing is Martin Seligman's PERMA model. PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And he describes these as the 5 pillars of wellbeing. And this is what Coach Hub Wellbeing uses as a bit of a backbone to the possible topics that your coachees can work on in the coaching program. Let's take some examples. With positive emotion, there's a lot of research into the science behind gratitude, as an example. And so a goal for coaching could be to set up a gratitude practice. There's a really lovely one called 3 Good Things, where you finish the day writing 3 good things that happened in that day. And this has been shown to have a really significant impact on subjective levels of well-being. So that's one example of a well-being goal that a coachee could do. If we have a look at engagement, this is a bit different from, it's linked of course, but slightly different from employee engagement. It's looking at traits like flow or strengths or goal setting and how those can be used to increase our engagement in our daily working lives. With positive relationships, we're looking at things like how to increase a sense of social belonging, maybe using tools like nonviolent communication or active constructive responding to support with developing and improving certain relationships. Perhaps you are a leader, a manager, and you want to improve some of the relationships that you have with your reports and maybe develop that positive leadership style. And these are some tools that you can use to actually develop that and create those positive meanings, which has a huge impact on your own well-being, but also that of your reports. Meaning. We are human beings, and meaning is what gives us purpose in our life and direction. So thinking about our values, thinking about our principles and how we can bring those into the work. This is something that can help us to really, or living in line with our values has been shown to be a huge benefit to our well-being. Then last but not least, accomplishment. We are also human beings who have the need for self-actualization, for growing, developing. And accomplishment is really key to our well-being. And of course, the workplace is one of the best places that we can satisfy this need. And so that's why having a look at that performance and well-being aspect is a big part of coaching, or coaching for well-being. So I've done quite a lot of talking already. I'd love to hand the virtual mic back over to you, let's say, and invite you to go to the platform called menti.com. So you can grab your mobile phone, you're welcome to open another tab and type in menti.com and use the code 52023167. And there will be, there's an opportunity to share your insights, your expertise about what are the competencies that you think are behind well-being. So reflecting on what you've heard today, what are some of the core competencies that you believe are really important to develop in your people? You know, we are a community here. This is a great opportunity to share from your personal experiences, professional experiences about the competencies behind well-being. So then taking a moment, let everyone settle in, trying to get access to that. So we have balance, and there's going to be a word cloud that comes up here. So a word cloud is, if you're not familiar with it, the words that are the biggest will be the ones that are the most commonly reported from you today. So we have a good turnout. Let's see what we believe to be the competencies behind well-being. The balance is coming up on the top, communication, resilience, self-awareness, openness, empathy, emotional intelligence, positivity. Right now we can see that resilience is a really core competency that we've identified. Brilliant. So for the sake of time, I will move on from this exercise, but we'll refer back to this. So what we can see, and also please keep Menti available either on your phone or your tab. Don't close it because we'll come back to this polling page again in a moment. So resilience, communication, and balance seem to be the top three competencies that you've identified behind well-being. So at Coach Hub, we propose to you our holistic coaching framework as the recommended competencies that your coaches can work on as part of a coaching program with us. So this is split into two main areas: grow as a person, inspire as a leader. It was developed with Martin Seligman's PERMA model in mind, but also Bass's transformational leadership model as well, to think about how to empower other people. So grow as a person is the more personal development aspect, looking at balance, key topic there, presence and purpose. And on the right, we have inspire as a leader, which was performance, empowerment, and communication. Now, within each of these categories, there are 3 focus areas. So, for example, in balance, we have emotional intelligence, which was one big aspect that you mentioned there. Communication also came up, and so looking at conflict management, feedback, general communication is also a recommended focus area that we propose for your coachees. And of course, we also have resiliency as a way to gain balance. So all of the competencies that you mentioned there are covered in our holistic coaching framework. So what this means is that our Coach Hub Wellbeing coaches are able to contract well-being goals within this framework. What's great as well about the Coach Hub Wellbeing product is that we support coachees on their coaching journey, and one of the first steps is to do what's called a self-assessment. And this is a self-assessment where a coachee can reflect on their strengths and development areas within this framework prior to their first coaching session. So here you can see an example of purpose. So there's a definition of what purpose is, and then there's a sample item that's used just to clarify. This is not a psychometric. It's really a self-reflective exercise that coaches do prior to coaching for goal formulation. And then on the last slide, you can see the results overview. So a coachee can see what the implications are from their results and use that to support with their goal formulation. We also have a fantastic toolbox of learning nuggets that a coach can assign to coachees that, again, are in line with this holistic coaching framework and is meant to help coachees in between their coaching session. So with Coach Hub Wellbeing, we recommend a bi-weekly rhythm of 2 45-minute sessions a month, and in between then to help with inspiration and also to reach their goals, their well-being goals, the coach can assign these learning nuggets, which are multimedia. There's podcasts, articles, self-coaching exercises. All of this can be used to help with the behavior change in between the coaching. I'd love to share a few fun facts and statistics about what our coaches have been working on in the last year. So over the pandemic period, time management, communication, conflict management, emotion regulation, and resilience were the top 5 most commonly chosen focus areas. And I think it's interesting that time management is at the top there, because from my personal experience, this blur between work and home life has risen or led to some challenges with actually managing my own time. And thinking especially about colleagues and families who have children or are homeschooling, this may have been an even bigger challenge. So of course, time management comes up. Communication, we've all had to change the way that we communicate in this remote work. And then maybe that's brought up some challenges, the conflicts. It's, for myself, I can say, required a lot of regulation, and we've all had to really, our resiliency has been tested. We've been experiencing this prolonged exposure to chronic stress, and that's something that is really leading, something that can easily lead to burnout. And this is a term that we'll go into a bit more discussion in just a moment. Before we do, let's hand the mic back to you. I want to understand what the most commonly heard myths that you hear are in your workplace. So go back to menti.com. Hopefully you haven't closed the link yet. Type in the code 52023167. And here I'm going to ask you to rank either from current experiences or maybe general experiences of myths about mental health in the workplace, and see what are the most common ones and the most rare ones. So I'll read out the different options here. We have the myth that mental health problems are rare, they're not a concern for business, they're not a priority for business, it's only a concern for outside of work. It's a condition that affects people in the same way. So now we can start to see how people are ranking them. Fantastic. We'll give about 1 more minute to do the ranking, and then we'll move on. So at the moment, in the first place, is the myth that people living with a mental health problem cannot work. Behind that is that mental health problems are rare, that these conditions, they affect people in the same way. They're a concern for outside of work, they're not a priority, and then it's not a concern for business. I'm sorry to be moving on so quickly, but we'll move on to the next, so move on from this exercise. And just as I saw, a few more answers came in there. So mental health problems are rare. People living with a mental health problem cannot work, and that mental health conditions affect people the same way are the top 3. So there is no particular order to this ranking. It's really just to get a sense of what your own experience was. But it's important to bust some of these myths, because again, those are barriers to bringing interventions like coaching into the workplace, because if we think that it's rare, which it's not, it's one of the main causes of overall disease burden worldwide, then there's not the urgency to do something about it. And there is an urgency, especially in the post-pandemic world. It has a serious consequence on your business. So every year, it costs businesses an average of about £1,300 per employee by not proactively doing something. And mental health is not a priority for business. So there's a term called presenteeism, when you're at work, but you're not really at work from a mental capacity, health perspective. And this is twice as, this accounts for twice as many losses than absences actually do. So thinking about shifting the perspective to presenteeism rather than just from absenteeism. It is a concern for work, because actually around 602,000 cases of work-related stress, depression and anxiety were found in the last study done on this in 2018-19. So a huge number of people experiencing that. People living with people can work who live with a mental health condition. Actually, about 1 in 6.8 people experience mental health problems in the workplace. So it is very present and prevalent. Finally, mental health problems, or conditions, they affect different people differently, or different groups differently. One unfortunate statistic is that employed women are twice as likely to have a mental health problem than men. And again, thinking especially over the last year, we're seeing a huge drop of female employees leaving the workforce, women, and this is partly because of the unpaid work and extra burden that often are put onto the women's shoulders, and this shows up in their mental health. And so again, we also need to think about how to best support different groups within our organization who will have certain experiences that others don't. So it becomes a diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect too. So here we're going to just jump into some other barriers, but also some solutions to helping mental health in the workplace and how coaching can help. The first is that, even in spite of what you just saw, over the last year, the majority of companies have actually really changed their policies, HR policies and resources to support well-being. The challenge is that only 1 in 6 employees report actually feeling supported. So there's a suggestion here that what's being offered may not be enough or what is needed. So to think about how maybe some changes to make to those initiatives. Finally, leaders are continuously reporting that well-being is a key focus area for them. And actually, leaders are a really important group to think about, especially in terms of your mental health strategy, because leaders have an important role to play in mitigating employee burnout. So burnout is a workplace phenomenon. It's the result of prolonged workplace stress, and it's an organization's responsibility to tackle that. And so leaders, they can develop these 5 competencies. These were shown by a recent Global Leadership Forecast article. At the top 5 competencies leaders develop to help mitigate that burnout, with empathy and actually developing that coaching leadership style at the top. So empathy is a really key, interesting one here. Of course, it makes sense. Over the last year, leaders have had to develop more compassion and support in different ways to their reports and to their workforce. But there is also such a thing as compassion fatigue. This is something that's been particularly present in our healthcare workers and services because of the huge amount of strain that they've experienced over the last year. But we also see this compassion fatigue in leaders who want to offer extra support to their reports. And unfortunately, leaders, they're also burning out. They need support too. And the results on this are shocking. So about 60% of leaders are burnt out. There's an 86% potential burnout risk, and 44% of leaders have also been shown to have a turnover risk. And then finally, there's been about 20% reporting bad virtual leadership skills. So there is not all leaders have been able to transition effectively into this remote leadership style. Handing it back to you, what are you currently doing to support your leaders' well-being? So grabbing Menti again, typing in the code, it's in the top right-hand corner there if you have missed it. How are you supporting your workforce's well-being? So some people mentioned coaching. Got some well-being apps. There's a lot of very popular apps out there to offer scalable solutions, legal support, check-ins, distance training, coaching for managers, developing competencies, team check-ins, coming up a lot. Fantastic. There's a few things there. I think check-in seems to be the most common one so far, just really having that direct one-to-one support. And of course, that's really important aspect, thinking about how to check in to see if everyone, how they're doing. I know a lot of organizations have been running surveys to see the level of well-being across certain groups, but also the whole workforce. So that's very important to know whether there is a need, but also what next best step to do. But also thinking with these check-ins, we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that disclosure is a big challenge and an obstacle for well-being in the workplace. And so whilst that has a huge amount of positive attention, there needs to be the right environment and culture for well-being in order for a check-in to be really beneficial and to be accurate. And that also goes for surveys. Of course, you can have anonymized surveys, but again, there's still unfortunately a stigma attached to being really honest about these personal experiences. And of course, there's lots of training, competency development, all this fantastic stuff. Thank you for sharing, everyone. So coaching is a fantastic, I mentioned before, it's a fantastic tool for supporting mental health and well-being. And this is something, and we start to think about the individual benefits that you can expect from a coaching program. So here I have just like to start off with a really great quote from one of our coaches saying that my coaching journey was brilliant and eye-opening. It helped me a lot in the difficult and challenging stage of my personal and professional life. So I think it's a great summary of just why coaching right now isn't a very effective solution. There's a great meta-analysis done by Thibaum, Bersma, and Van Vianen that looked at the most significant outcomes of coaching, and that was goal-related self-regulation, performance, work-related stress, and of course, helping to improve well-being and stress management. So the science is showing that work coaching does support with these topics, these areas. We've also seen some interesting statistics from McKinsey and Astra Education research showing that 91% of coachees, they actually find meaning again from a coaching program. They're able to significantly increase their self-awareness and stress reduction and reduce their stress reduction. There's a 70% increase in team spirits and also 60% increase in engagement. So here you can see the different levels on the individual, but also on the organizational that shows the benefit of coaching. So thinking about offering coaching to those leaders or to those to a wider workforce is a really, we can think about how to best align the purpose of the program with the overarching business needs and objectives that you're noticing in your workforce. So overall, the message here is about offering coaching or managing stress proactively with wellbeing coaching. And so your workforce can better face with these pressures that they're experiencing, develop a positive mindset and build that resilience. Of course, we're aware that wellbeing coaching or coaching in the workplace needs to demonstrate a business impact or return on investment. And luckily there is a strong business case for well-being in the workplace. The few core metrics here is around the cost of not doing something. So 33 and 42 billion pounds a year is led to, or cost is because of poor mental health to employers. So that's the rates of absenteeism, presenteeism, poor performance, thinking of those distressed but functional or acquiescent employees, especially, is a huge significant cost to organisations. There's also a significant cost to, in this case, the UK economy, so 74 to 99 billion pounds a year. And actually research from Deloitte shows that there's return on investment of proactive interventions that support employee mental health and well-being of 6 to 1. And so the proactive, preventative approach is the strongest way that you can have an impact or see the business benefits or the return on investment of coaching, as opposed to having a reactive approach. So doing it when it's too late. So what's the key takeaway? Thinking back to the beginning of our webinar about the elephant in the room, the key takeaway is to shrink the elephant by proactively approaching the topic, by addressing the topic and making sure that it's not swept under the rug, thinking about the impact of some of those myths might be on the reason why or why not to bring a personalized solution that's evidence-based to support not only well-being but performance, like coaching, into a workplace. Really find a way to help your workforce to do something positive for their mental health and their well-being. This is the last Menti exercise that we'll do today. And my question to you is, how likely are you to use coaching as a preventative solution? And we have 4 options. We have very likely, quite likely, not sure, undecided, and unlikely. So leave it a few moments to gather your feedback. Okay, so we've got quite a few very likely, some quite likely, some not sure, sort of thinking. Gone through a lot of information today, so I can imagine it's time to process and to let it sink in before really knowing what best to do next. Right, so Make sure that you have enough time for your wellbeing break. I'll move on. And to summarize today with the next steps. So what can you do next with Coach Hub? So Coach Hub, of course, we are a digital coaching provider. We have our Coach Hub Wellbeing solution, which gives your workforce access to individualized, highly personalized coaching, where they can address the wellbeing topics most relevant to them. That's within the holistic coaching framework I shared earlier. So this could look like a short to long-term coaching intervention. Again, the difference there depends on what the goals or what your goals for coaching or wellbeing coaching are. So if you want to really see that competency, mindset, behavior change, then you need to consider 6 to 12 month long programs, perhaps having a more interim solution. Then it's looking at that subjective level of well-being and trying to reduce that there. But the true impact on business can be seen with a longer program. And also thinking about who to offer that to. Lots of questions to discuss, and thinking about the coaching strategy itself, which is part of the service and an offering that we have at Coach Hub, because you have a dedicated account management team that takes you throughout the entire process, the coaching journey, from program setup, identifying those objectives, who's going to be receiving coaching, how are we going to evaluate it, how are we going to engage this audience, this target group. And we're also here to support with stakeholder management, of course, with the coach and coachee onboarding, then with having the ongoing coaching support alongside the coaching itself. And last but not least, there's a program evaluation. So we're with you every step of the way. And so the next step is to get in touch if you want to learn out more. We're very happy to discuss potential Coach Hub wellbeing programs with you. And so I wish you very well on your wellbeing break, reflecting back to those 5 ways to wellbeing. How will you use the next 10 minutes or so for yourself to really reset that brain, have a break, a screen break especially. We will send recording out of this webinar, as well as a 4-page wellbeing document. And there will be 5 very, very short survey questions that we'd love for you to answer just after this as we close for today. So thank you very, very much. Wishing you all the best and have a lovely rest of your day.